Good morning, everybody. Happy Monday morning. Welcome to Turfgrass Epistemology. I'm Travis Shaddix. Welcome. We're going to be looking at possibly the shortest turfgrass article in the history of turfgrass articles. It's probably, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 paragraphs long. And it doesn't even make a page. So look forward to that in a little bit here. It's a fun little article. We'll go over that in a few minutes. It's Thanksgiving weekend. I hope everybody's looking forward to Thanksgiving. I will be on today and tomorrow, but not on Wednesday or Thursday. So Thanksgiving and my kids are out of school on Wednesday and Thursday. So they are in school today and tomorrow. So I will be here today and tomorrow. Thursday last week, I was going over an article that I was talking, I didn't realize it until after I, hung up. And I was talking about it was talking about Thatch and quality and, management practices and so forth. And I'd mentioned throughout the article that the verbiage was a little bit odd. It was strange. Like they were saying things like, led us to believe this, and the data tended to do this, or it was like sort of it just was inappropriate language for a scientific article. It was the article by Murray and Juska from 1977. And I had mentioned throughout I gave 5 or 6 examples throughout the article about why it didn't really, the language just didn't seem to really fit really well in the scientific literature. I mean, I think the results were probably fine. I mean, it was a good article. But it just seemed odd, and I was mentioning that throughout the article as a means to show something at the end, and then I didn't show anything at the end. So sorry about that. I'm going to do that real quick here. So if you missed Thursday, I can't remember the title of the podcast. I can't remember what it was called, what I called it, but it was on Thursday, November the 16th of 2023. So just go back, and if you didn't watch it or see it or hear it, then you can go back and pick that up. But I wanted to wrap it up by explaining why it was important that I was mentioning that the language just seemed a little bit uncomfortable to me. And this happens, unfortunately, more regularly than it should when I'm reading articles where there's something just not quite right. The language isn't quite right, or they're saying something that just doesn't quite match up with, how it should be written. It just didn't seem right. And so this is the article here. I'm bringing it up for those listening. It's called Effect of Management Practices on Thatch Accumulation, Turf Quality, and Leaf Spot Damage in Common Kentucky Bluegrass. I went over this on Thursday. But let me just briefly explain why I was mentioning that it was not sitting well with me. And it's not a means to disparage or, demean the content or the authors. But it's important that you read these articles, or when you read these articles, that you don't assume just because it's in a scientific journal that it is, flawless, or it should be, taken as the absolute truth, right? So I wouldn't do that. And I think over the years, I've developed sort of just a sort of a basic understanding or feeling of how things sort of flow throughout scientific articles. And this one didn't quite really match that. And occasionally that happens with articles with me. I'm like, something's not right. And then I start investigating it and kind of looking into it. And I'm like, oh, that's why that is. And I didn't mention that. So let's explain. So this is the article. And I mentioned things like it tended to, and we don't use words like tend to or phrases like tend to. in scientific literature because the data or the results were, it either was or was not. In other words, like it either differed from the non-treated or it did not, or it either differed from another treatment or it did not. It reduced Thatch or it resulted in a reduction of Thatch or it did not. We have to have some sort of measuring stick to know what that is. In our world, it's statistics, right? And generally we'll use the 95% range. So in other words, when we say like it's the p-value is 5%, so the probability of saying that it's different when in fact it's not different is 5% or less. In other words, there's a 95% chance that we're correct. That's sort of like the benchmark of, in our world of turfgrass management, that scientists, if we're 95% confident that we're correct, then we'll say, yes, they differ. But if it's 90% or 85% or less, then we will say they don't differ. Anyway, I'm just saying that you sort of understand as you're reading through these things, you kind of gain this basic awareness of how things flow and things we don't say. We don't say tend to. We don't say believed to do this or, it's just strange. And then when I read it and I went back and when I started feeling it felt weird, and so I go back and I start looking at the authors, and generally you'll see the authors and you'll see a superscript up here by the author's name. Oftentimes, sometimes it's a 1 or 2 or asterisk or whatever it might be, and that gives you an indication of like where more information about that author or those authors. And if you go, and this one has a superscript of 2, and you can go down here to the footnotes of that page, and you can read more about what it is they're trying to explain about the authors. And in this case, the number 2 says research agronomist, Field Crops Lab, Bentsville Agricultural Research Center, the ARS at the USDA, Bentsville, Maryland. The junior author is now deceased. So this Juska person apparently had passed away before this was published, and the J.J. Murray author was still alive. But it says they were from the Beltsville Agricultural Research Center at the Agricultural Research Services at the United States Department of Agriculture. And when I read that, it sort of all made sense at that point to me. I'm like, oh, whenever you have authors that are not strictly in the world of science or academia, where they're regularly publishing and regularly writing things, they're regularly reviewing articles, they're editing articles, they're involved with editorial boards, there's the scientific community that they're deeply involved with. When you have authors that are outside that community or that group, oftentimes you'll get language like that, where the articles, like I said before, the article's fine, the results are probably fine. But that sort of confirmed to me that, I did have good reason to feel uncomfortable with some of the language, because language like that is in this article generally won't occur when you have authors that are deeply involved with the scientific publication process. And these authors, they may have been on the board for all I know. But when you're not from a university, you're not from a dedicated scientific program, oftentimes like vague language and inappropriate language can kind of creep its way into articles. So the only reason I mention it is not to beat up on the authors or this paper. I liked the paper. It was okay. But it's just to express to you that it can go to the extreme sometimes. And I'll give an example of that when we get into soil testing and nitrogen application rates, which who knows when that's going to be. But there's an article and I read it and I was like, man, something is just not right about this article. They're making claims and saying things in a way that it just didn't sit right. And then when you read it, the author was an owner in the company that provided that soil test, right? And it doesn't invalidate the data or the results. But it certainly should give you, pause about whether or not, how confident you should be about the results, right? When an author has a financial vested interest in the outcome of the paper, it doesn't mean the outcome or the results are wrong. It just certainly provides a little bit of concern, and some skepticism is certainly warranted as to whether or not you should hold those results in very, very confidently or not. So that's the reason I mentioned that on Thursday, and then I ran off and forgot to actually explain why I was saying all those things about why I was not comfortable with some of the language in that paper. But more times than not, I will say more times than not, when I'm reading a paper, nothing ever like that happens. I don't ever feel uncomfortable. The words are not unweird or just vague or ambiguous. And it's usually, 95% of the time, everything's fine. I don't even think about it. But most of the time when I'm reading an article and I do feel strange about it, I'm like, something's not right. More times than not, I end up finding that the authors have some sort of, vested interest, or they're not completely scientifically, mature, or they don't have a lot of robust writings where they've developed those writing skills over time. Usually that's what I find. So just keep that in mind as you kind of progress through. If you choose to start reading these articles, definitely do not read an article and say, yep, that is what I'm going to do because that's what that article said. That makes total sense and I'm going to do that. Don't do that. We're in science, and what does science do? Science builds models. So the model of turfgrass science has been established and is continuing to be built by every single article that goes into that model, right? So that's just one article that goes in, and it kind of helps build the scientific model of turfgrass science. And but it doesn't necessarily mean that everything in that paper is valid and true, right? So just be mindful that, be skeptical, be careful about just immediately implementing results from a single paper. We would prefer to look at the body of literature, the body of evidence, and see what that says. And if one paper conflicts with the body of evidence, that's fine. We just want to make sure that, how confident should we be with that? And a great example of where one article could completely conflict with the body of evidence, but yet still be correct, is Einstein's article in, 1918 or 19, right? When all the physicists in the world said he was wrong. And Einstein said, no, I'm right. And they said, prove it. And he said, okay, if I'm right, then you should be able to see this specific star in this exact location during an eclipse. I think it was 1918 when the eclipse was. And I don't remember where it was. There was a war going on at the time. They couldn't get it all done. Anyway, there was clearly evidence that Einstein was correct and all the physicists were wrong. And they had to wait till the next full solar eclipse, which was several years later, before Einstein became world famous. Because at that point, he was shown to be correct. He made a prediction. He said, if I'm right, it'll be here. And if it's not there, then I'm wrong. And he was right. And all the physicists that were naysayers and rejected his philosophy or his hypothesis were shown to be wrong. And he was shown to be right. My point being is that one article coming in that conflicts with the body of evidence, it doesn't mean it's wrong. It could be correct. It could change things. It adds to the scientific model. And it's from the model that we want to make decisions, not from a single paper that goes into it. Okay, in Einstein's case, his one paper completely changed the entire model of physics. That's very rare. But that's what we want to look at as a whole. What does the body of the literature say? Not just one article. What else? A couple people posted some stuff online on my YouTube channel about some questions and stuff in an article or a podcast I put up. I'm trying to figure out how to do all this stuff. I'm trying to navigate the worlds of, online social media stuff, and I don't have a clue what I'm doing. So what I'm trying to do is load the episodes as podcasts so that people can listen to them, and rather than while they're driving or while they're at work, rather than have their phone on YouTube all the time. And I'm trying to figure that out. And in the process of figuring that out, it looked like on YouTube I could load it as an audio podcast. And I think I did that. But when I did that, it loaded it. It looked like it was a new article or something, and some people actually watched it or listened to it. So that's very, very nice of you all to listen to that article. But they were asking, like, there's no audio or there's no video here or whatever. Well, I don't really know. I'm trying to figure out the podcast stuff. So at some point in the very near future, all of my episodes will be on the podcast platforms. In fact, most of them are there right now. I just haven't really publicized it because I'm not entirely sure I'm doing it right, as shown by my mess up on YouTube podcast. So anyway, it went up, it went down, and in the meantime, I'm still trying to work it out. So that's what that whole mess was about this weekend when some people were texting me trying to figure out what what the video problem was. Okay, so bear with me while I figure out this whole mess. So that'll be up in the next couple of weeks. I'll figure out some way to promote it and let you guys, if you want to, just listen to it, which apparently a lot of people do. They just want to listen rather than watch the whole thing. So that's that. And in the meantime, all the shorts that were on my YouTube channel have been all removed by YouTube for the, second or third time, something like that, whatever. It's not YouTube's fault. I just keep screwing it up. So I'm figuring it out, guys. I appreciate your patience as I navigate these uncharted waters. I don't know what I'm doing. So I think I'm sort of getting to the point where I kind of know what to do to get it to where I want to get it to without all these backups and changes and deletions and all these things. So if you're looking for one of the shorts or a quick little blurb or whatever, I think they've all been deleted. And I'm not going to go back and put it up for a third time. So whatever. I'll just have to go forward with what I go forward with. So that's that. What else? I spent 5 hours this last week getting my auto mower connected back. If anybody ever wants some input, if you're thinking about buying an auto mower and you're like vacillating and don't really know this or that, and is it good? Is it worth it? I'll be happy to give you my input. I don't know, shoot me an email or give me a call or something, because I've been dealing with auto mowers since probably 2017, 16 on a research level. And I've had an auto mower on my lawn for 3 years or 4 years. I can't remember. And there's a lot of benefits to it. There's no question. It'll be a long time before I buy a gasoline-powered lawnmower again. I'll tell you that, or hire someone to mow my lawn. It'll be a very long time before I do that. But with the auto mower comes a lot of problems. Okay, comes a lot of little things I didn't think of, and one of them is the wires getting cut. That's the biggest problem. Pain in the ass. Freaking wire gets cut. If you think you're gonna put that wire in and it's gonna be a-okay, like a dog fence wire or whatever, you can forget about that. It gets cut, and so anyway, I was trying to troubleshoot it, and to troubleshoot a wire that's in the ground, I don't just lay it on top of the ground. Although I did this last time because I got tired of it. You can lay it on top of the ground and stake it in, and eventually it'll work its way down into below the grass, which it does work that way. But really, it's better to take the time and actually bury it an inch or two below the soil if you can, because inevitably somebody's going to come along and catch it or cut it, or the lawnmower is going to catch it. Who knows what's going to happen? And I couldn't find the cut in my wire, and I went out and troubleshot it. And there's a couple little tricks you can do to kind of find which side of the loop is cut. But when I did that, there was no signal anywhere, which told me either something's wrong with the whole system, or there's a cut on both sides of where I connected it in. And come to find out, there was 6 or 7 cuts in my wire. So every time I found a cut, I thought I solved the problem, and I connected it with these little connectors, and then it didn't solve the problem. And I pulled it and found another cut. Well, I had a huge tree fall over, and it cut the wire. So when I reconnected it, I thought that was it, but it actually cut the wire twice. Anyway, I've had probably 7 or 8 or maybe 9 cuts in that wire in the last 3 years or 4 years, however long I've had it. It's going to happen. But God, I mean, you would think at some point it'd be like, okay, I've got it all figured out, and you won't have any more cuts. But you're going to cut that thing for sure. But on the flip side, I spent 3 or 4 hours out there trying to troubleshoot it and finally figured it out and got it all working. It's all working now. But that's minuscule compared to the time it would have taken me, or the money it would have cost me to actually hire someone to mow my lawn, or me to mow it myself, which I don't want to do. As you all know, I have no interest in doing anything to my lawn at all other than enjoying it. So that's the reason I got the auto mower. But every now and then, once a year, once every other year, you're going to have to go out there and spend some hours either maintaining the wires or maintaining the base station, or, doing something to it to kind of keep it, up to date. And it's not that big a deal. I'm acting like it's a big deal. It's not. It's just, you quickly become an amateur electrician real quick because you're trying to figure out all these electrical connections and loops and signals and all these things. So I did that. It's done. So now hopefully when the season comes in, whatever, April or May, it'll be ready to go and I can just plug it in and don't have to mow my lawn next year. I mowed it every week this year. I got tired of that. Oh, anyway, so that was what I did this weekend. Fun. I had a problem with my son, as you know. He's autistic and he loses track of time and he loses his memory sometimes. He forgets what he's supposed to do, and he got lost on the way to school or on the way home from school the last week or two. You guys remember that probably. Had to call the police and it was a mess. So I went and got an Apple Watch. And because my thought was the Apple Watch, well, I'll know where he's at and I can ping him during the day or at lunch and say, hey, stay focused, you're doing good or whatever. Well, the Apple Watch doesn't work in his school. So I was like, okay, whatever. I mean, it didn't function. So I went to go download a third-party app called Find My Kids, which works specifically on the Apple Watch. And I spent 5 days, maybe more. I went to Verizon twice, bought the watch, didn't work, couldn't get it to download the app. Took it back. They wouldn't fix it, couldn't fix it. I took it to the Apple store, said, all I want to do is download this app. That's it. Oh, no problem. Couldn't get it to work. Got me another watch, took it back, returned it to Verizon, went back to Apple, bought another Apple Watch. I said, I'm going to stay in the store. I got there at like 6 o'clock at night and it closes at 8. I said, I'm going to stay in the store until this app's downloaded. He's like, no problem. 8 o'clock, no app, not working. And we don't know what's going on. It must be a new app operating system. You got to download that. So I went home and downloaded the operating system on these watches. It takes like 5 hours to download. It took on this watch. I just did it overnight. I just let it run overnight because it was taking 4 to 5 hours to download this iOS system on a watch. Took it back, downloaded the app, or tried to download the app, wouldn't download. Took it back to Apple. A third time I've gone back to Apple. I said, all I want to do is download this app. That's it. All I want to do. It's not complicated. And they said, sure, no problem. Couldn't download it. So they took my phone. And the reason I'm saying this is about 5 minutes before I came on today, none of my lights would work in the house because they're all on my phone. Couldn't get them to work. The reason I couldn't get them to work is because Apple reset my phone because I thought it was my phone. And it wasn't my phone. Come to find out, if anybody wants an Apple Watch and you want to track your children or have it set up as a family member, so you can talk to them, they can have their own phone number, you can call them, they can call you, they can be away from your phone, they can be wherever, and it'll still function as a separate entity, a separate item, which is what set up as a family member is supposed to do. If anybody wants that, and you want a third-party app, you can't do it. Because Apple banned third-party apps on on family member setups on the Apple Watch. So, and the only reason I found that out is because finally a technician in the Apple store who has their phone set up or has their watch set up as a family member phone, she goes, yeah, you can't do that. After iOS 9, you can't on the watch, you can't you can't download third-party apps on family members' phones. I'm like, well, thanks for telling me. It took me 5 days to have someone in the Apple store to tell me that you can't download a third-party app on a family member's phone. So don't think you can do that if you want your child to have a family member account on a watch. So fun. All right, enough about my ongoings and my back and forth with all sorts of stuff. Let's get into the article. This article is like I said at the beginning, super short. It's not long at all. We'll go through it in probably 10 minutes. We'll be done. The chat, hey, Super TA and Brady, Lawn Sauce, still in Japan, still on vacation. Lush, Chad, OSU Turfman, good morning. Randy from Bulgaria, and Looney. Got some good an eclectic group here this morning. E-Shot. I don't recognize that name. E-Shot. I'm sorry if you've texted or chatted before. I just don't recognize that name. I don't recognize the chat name, the Chad name either. I'm sorry. I'm really bad about checking the chat while I'm here because I'm a one-man show here. So it's hard for me to kind of keep track of everything. By the way, to show my ignorance, what is the 100 icon with the thumbs up? What does 100 mean? I've seen that before, like on chats and things. Does it just mean like 100% or something? I don't know what that means. I'm completely ignorant when it comes to these things. I get the cup of coffee, Super TA 320. I get that. And I get the thumbs up. But I don't know what the 100 thing. How do you even do that in chat? Like do I just type in the numbers 100? See, that doesn't do that. I don't know why you guys do these things. But if someone can tell me what like 100 means, maybe it means like we're here 100% is the way I'm taking that. I don't know what that means, but sorry. It doesn't take long for you to reach my level of ignorance. Okay, so Super ATA says yes, 100%. Okay. Well, I'm glad you're here 100%. So we're going to go an article today, and tomorrow we're going to go over another article that is one of the earlier articles with the white rot fungi. This is before the burnt paper we talked about on Wednesday night when he was using lacase. Or no, he was using... no, that wasn't the burnt paper. It was I think it was the Paul Raymer paper. They were using lacase in the greenhouse. Well, before that paper, there was another older article in the 90s that used that concept, and we're going to go over that tomorrow. But today, we're going to talk about a paper published in HortScience in 1976, and it was in volume 11. And the reason I mention that is because when HortScience came out, it was, well, in the 70s, and I guess this was volume 11. So I guess it would have been maybe in the late 60s when it came out. If you have a different, let's see, volume. I don't know how they set up their volume counts back then. But usually when journals open up and they generally have fewer restrictions or fewer criteria to get published because they're trying to get articles in, and they're trying to get their journal reputation built up and their impact factor built and all these things. And oftentimes when you read some of these articles from the really early journals, well, when the journals first started, oftentimes you'll find articles like this. And you'll see the same thing even in art journals that will open up today, like agricultural research letters. And some of when they first opened that up, I guess it was in 17 or 18, I can't remember. You got to pay to get in there now because it's open access. But early on, they would let articles go in for free. And they said, hey, we're only going to allow free articles until this date. And then after that, you're going to have to pay because they're trying to prime the system, basically, trying to get the articles out. And I think that's probably what happened with this article, where it's so short, which is nothing wrong with being short, but there's not a lot here. And you would never get this published in HortScience today. You wouldn't even get it past the editor's email. You would send it in and they would just immediately send it back and go, what is this? But back then, the reason I'm saying that, back then it was very common. This is very normal for it to have short, succinct, articles that are not particularly robust or profound. They're just straight to the point. It was very common back then. This article was this research was done in Hawaii. And I know I don't know, but I'm pretty sure that we have at least one person in the turfgrass community that lives in Hawaii, Mr. Ray Ito. So he might know these authors for all I know. I have no idea. But anyway, this was done in Hawaii and by Murdoch and Barr and published in HortScience, which today HortScience is a top tier journal. I mean, I wouldn't put it above. Oh, and I'm going to end up doing like a top 10 turfgrass research journals. By the way, I'm going to probably do that either as a video and post it, or maybe I'll do it live. But I'm going to give you guys an idea of the ranking in terms of these journals. And the intent is not to put one above the other in terms of like, this one's better and you shouldn't read the other ones. It's just to provide you an idea of how confident you should be in general from the journal articles, from the articles in that journal. And HortScience is up there. I mean, I wouldn't put it above Crop Science or JEQ or Agronomy Journal or Soil Science in America Journal, but it's definitely up there. I mean, I have a great deal of confidence that HortScience is a the articles nowadays that go in that journal are pretty sound, pretty solid. So anyway, this was done in Hawaii, and it's extremely short. Let's read through it. And the reason I mention this is that actually, before we get into it, we've all come across bugs in the jugs, commercial microorganisms, right? And even today, it amazes me the lack of moral or ethical boundaries salesmen and companies will go to sell people just junk. Most of it's a grift. There's a lot of charlatans in our industry, and I'm not saying that all bugs in the jugs are a grift, but that's a pretty good sign when someone walks in and tries to sell you a bunch of bugs in a jug, what side of the aisle they're on. They're certainly not on the aisle of evidence, because there's very rarely, extremely rarely will you find pretty solid evidence that some sort of bug or microorganism is going to have some profound effect on Thatch. Okay. But it can make sense if you're not, knowledgeable with the literature, because Thatch is broken down by microorganisms, right? So when someone comes in your door and says, hey, you got a Thatch problem, and you go, well, yeah, I actually do have a Thatch problem. Well, Thatch is broken down by microorganisms, and this product has 1 million microorganisms per milliliter or whatever, some crazy number they throw at you, right? And you're like, well, maybe I should do that. That might work. Well, no. That's what's referred to as a charlatan. He doesn't know. He doesn't know that those bugs do that. He's just trying to convince you to spend your money on it. Okay, there's only a few products that have any beneficial impact on Thatch. As far as I know, none of them are bugs in a jug. But you still see these people showing up nowadays trying to sell you a bunch of junk, trying to get your money. Because they can be convincing. Bugs do break down Thatch, and bugs are in this jug. Therefore, bugs in this jug should break down this Thatch. It's a grift. And so years ago, I used to manage the lawn care division of a fertilizer company in Central Florida, and they were a small portion of that company, but they had a few $1 million in sales. And one of the customers that was fairly reliable and fairly loyal to the company I worked for was a company north of Tampa, and I don't think he'll mind if I use his name. The company's name was McGuire Great Outdoors or Beautiful Outdoors or something along those lines. And the owner was McGuire. Awesome guy. Dude was solid. He really, when you go in and talk to McGuire, he would just say, hey, I'm not really sure what I'm doing. Can you help me? That's so profoundly valuable to be able to acknowledge your shortcomings openly like that, and accept, hey, I'm flawed, and how can what can you provide to help me? I need help in this area. And I remember the first time I went in his office, I sat down with him and we were just chit chatting, and he goes, well, I want to know how you can help me. I was like, well, what can I do? And he said, well, I got problems. He goes, right there on the floor, there's a bucket with a bunch of bugs in it. I don't even know why I bought it. I was like, okay. He goes, I don't even know what it does. I don't even know if it helps me, but for some reason I bought it because the guy sounded convincing or whatever. I said, well, unfortunately, you probably got taken. Just the reality it is, you probably got taken. And it happens all the time, guys. It happens all the time with these grifters that come in and try to sell you a bunch of stuff that they don't know if it works or not. And there's certainly very little evidence to indicate that it does work. But yet you still feel compelled to buy from them, or they convince you, and it happens all the time. It happens to me. I still buy vitamins, even though all the evidence in the literature, at least in the United States, it says that if you are on a normal, healthy American diet, you probably taking vitamins for a normal person probably doesn't do anything, unless you have some sort of pre-existing condition or something, But yet I still buy them. So I'm being taken right now. So what are you going to do? I'm trying to get better at what I do, but the same thing happens in turf. And I felt so sorry for him, and I worked with him for a few years, and we kind of tweaked his program and kind of got some of that nonsense out of his program. But anyway, that stuff happens. And that's what they say right here in the beginning of this article about bugs in a jug and Thatch. So here we go. If I can draw on this. Yeah, I can. So we're going to start right here. Whoops, that's red. That's green. How do I usually have this in red? We're going to start right here. I don't know how that got changed. Let me change this to, yeah, that's okay. All right. So Thatch in turf. Hang on. Sorry. Give me a second here. Thatch in turf is defined as a tightly intermingled layer of dead and living stems and roots that develops between the roots. We've all heard that definition. And that, as Dr. Barrett mentioned, the definition doesn't really do it justice. I don't want to speak for him, but if I remember what he said, basically is we've used that definition over the years, but it probably needs to be fixed because it's a lot more going on than just that. But it is composed of materials high in lignin content, meaning the vascular strands of stems, leaf sheaths, and nodes of stems. Those are very difficult to break down. Because of its lignin content, Thatch has resistance to breakdown by soil microorganisms. And we've shown that in many of the articles we've already gone through. It's the lignin that's the problem. The cellulose is generally broken down so fast. It's maybe a little bit similar to like the analogy of like just simple sugars versus carbohydrates a little bit. Simple sugars are going to be almost instantly broken down, whereas carbohydrates take a little more time. Well, imagine that, and then turning it in, like, say, the fat in the human body, that's got to be broken down to go into carbohydrates to go, so it's a component of the turf that just takes a very, very long time for microorganisms to break down. Thatch is undesirable because the aesthetic value of the turf is reduced. Water infiltration is impeded, which we showed an article that didn't really support that. The water infiltration is slowed initially, but once the thatch layer is moistened, then it did not impede water movement through the thatch. Disease incidence is increased. Scalping due to mowing is increased. Rooting depth is decreased. Heat and cold tolerance reduce, and proneness to iron chlorosis increase. I'm going to pull those 3 articles. Particularly the one on iron. He's citing 3 articles here. I'm going to pull those probably and go over them next week. At least the iron chlorosis. Maybe I end up going over the iron chlorosis one in a month or 2. But basically what he's saying is there's a lot of problems when you have excess thatch. But I wouldn't assume that all this is true until I went and read the articles that he's citing, because certainly infiltration can be slowed initially, but as long as it's moist, the thatch doesn't seem to have too much of a problem letting the moisture, the water through, because the pore size is so large. But it has to be moist so it's not hydrophobic. Cultural practices such as vertical mowing, aerification, and top dressing are used to control thatch, but all are time-consuming and temporarily detract from turf appearance and interfere with its use. So that's true. I mean, there's the literature basically will agree with all that. Vertical mowing, aerifying, top dressing, you're going to have to shut the course down or shut the field down, or the homeowner is going to know that there's some top dressing on their lawn, or it's going to be tore up and from vertical mowing or whatever. That's all true. I don't know necessarily if there's a valid and consistent way to avoid that, but there are some products. But the idea here is that he's making a case as to the normal management practices have shortcomings. It's that simple. Recently, commercial products have appeared which are advertised at, why am I having such a problem with this today? Which are advertised as, which are advertised as being effective in breaking down thatch when applied to turf in small amounts. While the active constituents of these materials are not listed by the manufacturer, it is implied that they contain an inoculum of microorganisms which aid in the decomposition of organic material. So you have to understand, and like I said, I was in the distribution, very, very peripherally involved in manufacturing of turfgrass products for many years. And you have to understand that and on many products like these bugs in a jug, there's not really much, at least back then, there's not much oversight. They can just put whatever they want in a jug and call it whatever they want to call it and do whatever they want to say in most states. States like California require at least some evidence. But They can say whatever they want. And that's the reason this channel's here. Turfgrass epistemology. How do you know what you know? How do you know that that product actually does that? That's what I hope people learn to develop, that skill. You don't necessarily have to ask the question, but mentally, when someone walks in your door and says, this product's going to launch the space shuttle for free, okay, mentally you should be thinking, doubt it. Pretty healthy skepticism in that regard. And the same thing holds true in this. These bugs are going to break down your thatch. You don't have to confront the person and don't have to be, rude about it. But mentally, you should be thinking, well, I'm aware that mechanical thatch removal is generally the way to go. I'm also aware that that results in some poor looking turf sometimes. I'm also aware that there's a product that we went over that contains an enzyme called lacase. I'm aware that that might help reduce the development of it, the rate. But I haven't seen anything about bugs breaking it down yet. Right. I haven't seen it. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but I haven't seen anything. So when someone comes in the door and asks you those things and says these things and tries to sell you a bunch of stuff, it doesn't mean you don't have to be a jerk about it. You don't have to be, resistant to it, but skeptical about it. Healthily skeptical about claims, right? I'm pretty convinced that it's probably not going to do that, but I don't know if it's not going to do that. So it's up to them to show that it will do that. Oh, here's a flyer from University ABC that showed it increased root depth by 20%. Couldn't care less about that stuff, guys. I'll go into that in great detail, believe me. Those university flyers, I'm not university, but flyers from companies that contain university data. If it's not published, I couldn't give two flips about it. Couldn't care less about it. I care about it in the sense that it's affecting our industry. It's infecting our industry. I care about that. I care that you're being convinced to do something potentially against the body of evidence. I care about that. But I don't care about that as a means to convince me. And I hope at some point over time we begin, maybe to develop that same healthy skepticism. Somebody comes in and tries to sell you a bunch of bugs in a jug. It's ridiculous. So anyway, he's saying the same thing in 1976. And I bet right now there's someone listening to this that has some experience with someone coming in and trying to sell them a bunch of bugs, trying to break down the thatch. So anyway, these products contains microorganisms. The objective of this study was to evaluate the effectiveness of two of these materials. One was called Bio-D-Thatch, and one was called Thatch Away. And you can insert any brand name you want to insert today, okay? D-Thatcher, Thatch R less, Thatch Away, whatever you want to insert. Those names existed, or similar names existed 47 years ago. So we're not really that far away from where we were, really. In common Bermudagrass, okay, so looking for the objective, the effectiveness in common Bermudagrass teas in 2 golf courses in Hawaii. Okay. One common Bermudagrass tea at each of 2 golf courses was used to study the effect of Bio-D-Thatch and Thatch Away on thatch accumulation over a 5-month period. Treatments at the 2 locations are listed in Table 1. So let's look at Table 1. Hang on a second. Let me see if I can get here. Yeah, there we go. So Table 1, for those listening, is titled The Effect of Ethifon Spray on Defoliation. Oh, wait. That's a different... Sorry. I should have whited that out. That was from the article above this article. Sorry. Table 1. Here we go. All right, here we go. I'll have to just zoom out because it won't all fit in the page for people watching. Okay, so Table 1 is titled The Effect of Bio-D-Thatch and Thatch Away on Thatch Measurements on Common Bermudagrass Teas at 2 locations in Hawaii. And the treatments were a control, Bio-D-Thatch at, so this is grams per square meter, which is, let me me get this down a little bit here, which is in pounds per thousand. So 4.9 grams per square meter is 1 pound per thousand. This is 2 pounds per thousand. And then I don't know what this is. What's 19? What's 19 divided by 4.9? 19.6 divided by 4.9 is 4 pounds. So 1 pound, 2 pounds, and 4 pounds and 0. So he has a rate basically on one location of biodethatch. In the second location, he has a non-treated, and he has 1 and 2 pounds of biodethatch, and he has 1 and 2 pounds of thatch away. Okay. So those are the treatments that he put out. And that's the only table in the whole study, by the way. We're about finished. But let me explain what he did. Let me get this out. Okay. Materials were applied with a drop type fertilizer spreader on plots in a randomized complete block design. Okay, that's not a big deal. And watered in. Teas were watered twice weekly. Okay, Thatch was measured at the time the treatments were applied in June of 1957. Dang, that was 20 years before they published it. They did it in 57 and they published it in 76. Okay. And at approximately 1, 2, and 5 months afterwards. So they sampled it on the day of, and they sampled it after 1 month, after 2 months, and after 5 months. Thatch measurements were made by removing a 10 centimeter, which is like 4-inch diameter plug from each plot. So they took probably a 4-inch little plugger and they removed a core from each plot and random and measuring the thatch layer with a ruler at 2 points 180 degrees apart. So if you remember from our thatch study, when we're talking about how do we measure thatch, we find that using a caliper or using a ruler to measure the depth tends to be the most reliable method, which is something you can do yourself. You don't need to go buy a thatch meter or a compressor or a scale or oven to dry it out. You don't need to go buy all that stuff. You can simply buy a ruler or a caliper and you're going to get the same numbers or very close to the same level of precision and accuracy that I would as a scientist. I would use that as well. So that's a very appropriate way. And we're going to go over a paper too, actually, that doesn't use that. And we have to be mindful that the results might be true. I'm not saying it's inaccurate, but the method they use to measure it is certainly of greater variability than using a ruler. So my point being is the results here should be pretty solid because they did a method that's pretty sound. For the purpose of measurement, thatch was defined as the organic material between the soil surface and the green vegetation. Now so they didn't separate like the mat from the thatch, which we talked about in a previous paper. The 2 thatch measurements from each plug were averaged in the data subjected to now. So they measured it on one side of the thatch, they measured it on 180 degrees on the other side of the plug, and they took the average, and that was one number. Normal maintenance practices in play were carried out on the test areas throughout the experiment period. So it was a golf course, it was active, they were still playing. No dethatching was done during the experimental period, so they didn't do any mechanical removal at all of the thatch. No significant differences in thatch thickness were found between any of the treatments at either location on any date of measurement. I like it when I don't like it when people do like this and this and this and this, but I like it when people do that, like to emphasize the point. It says no significant difference in thatch thickness were found between any of the treatments at either of the locations on any date. So basically he's saying, knock off the silliness, goofballs. Okay. This stuff doesn't work. Stop selling it to people. That's what he's basically telling the salesman is what he's saying here. It doesn't work. We didn't see anything. I guess we can't say it doesn't work. So as a scientist, I can't say it doesn't work. But as a practitioner, as a pragmatist, it doesn't work. Stop selling it to my people. You're fleecing our industry. These results are in agreement with those of Koth, and this was another article this was in the USGA Green section, Koth of 1972, who found little improvement in the rate of thatch breakdown from various treatments, including providing energy sources for soil microbes. So you're going to see some sugar products come out in the next couple of papers I'm going to talk about. The idea behind the sugars is that you're providing soluble carbon to microbes to hyperinflate their population. I will say this. There is very clear evidence that the application of soluble carbon to the soil will hyperinflate microorganisms or their activity. There's virtually no debate on that. Okay. I don't think you're going to find any knowledgeable soil scientist who's going to say no. Applying, the right rate, applying appropriate rates of soluble carbon will not increase microbial activity. It very likely will, but I'm not measuring soil microbial activity. Couldn't care less about that. What I care about is its effect on thatch, right? And so don't get, again, here's an idea. This is epistemology. So don't fall into the trap that because this A causes B and B causes C, therefore A will cause C. It doesn't work that way. So soluble carbon will increase microbial activity. Increased microbial activity oftentimes will increase thatch degradation. So therefore soluble carbon will increase thatch degradation. It doesn't always work that way. And we're going to show papers that will show that. Okay, there will be a paper or two that I showed that there is probably something going on there, but don't automatically assume that. Most of the time it's better to assume the opposite. To assume it's not going to do anything until someone shows some evidence that it will. But here it is where they showed this particular paper in 1972 where they're providing energy sources for soil microbes. So they're talking about soluble carbon. And then the other one was exposing the turf to intermittent mist to improve microbial activity and adding inoculum of selected bacteria. So in that case where they're doing all those, they're adding moisture, they're adding selected bacteria, and they're adding soluble carbon essentially. They didn't, and it says the improvement in rate of thatch breakdown from various treatments, who found little improvement, basically. There was essentially nothing happened when they did all those three in 1972 from those products. But again, don't take that and run with that and say it's never going to happen, okay? There will be occasions where there may be some benefit to that, and I'll show you evidence of that in the next couple of papers. The Letterbor-Skogli paper, which we went over, if you remember, if you haven't listened to that article, that podcast, you can go back and pull that up. It's from 1967. Also provided energy sources for soil microorganisms with no effect on rate of thatch breakdown. So another article says it didn't do it. And this was from the early times, 60s and so forth. So we developed some things since then, but back then they didn't show any effect. In view of this study, which clearly shows that thatch is composed of sclerified tissues and is high in lignin content, it is not surprising that adding inoculum of microorganisms or providing extra energy sources is ineffective. It's not surprising that it's ineffective in breaking down thatch. They're saying it's not. The Schubert, which was 1965, this was just a lignin thing, lists only a few wood-rotting fungi as being capable of breaking down lignin. So this little guy right here, Schubert, 1965, lignin biochemistry is what the next paper is going to use as a means to justify inclusion of white rot fungi as to measure thatch breakdown. Okay, so it says right here, if you want to know, let me just highlight that. If you want to know where all this sort of stuff came from, it came from this. Oh, I can't highlight that. Oh, what happened? Did I screw something up? Oh, man. I am the world's worst. I need some help. Let me highlight this. This Schubert paper, it's a book, I think it is where all the idea behind lacase kind of generated from. It was published in 65, and what it's saying, it provides the biochemistry of lignin and how and what is likely to break it down. And it says right here, only a few wood-rotting fungi will break that down. So you're talking about fungus that breaks down tree stumps. That's what can have an effect on thatch because it's so resistant due to the high lignin content, okay? And in the next paper, which I'll go over tomorrow morning, that's when they didn't start, but that paper looks at that specific concept on thatch, and we're going to find tomorrow that there may be some benefit to that. And then from there, we saw the burnt paper in 1990. No, that wasn't the burnt paper in 1990. It was another paper he did. But we saw I'm going to say Paul Raymer, but the first author was another student of his, I think. But we saw some more papers come out in the last 10, 15 years that look specifically at an enzyme that is exuded or generated by white rot fungi. Okay. So last paragraph is, while the cultural practices of top dressing, vertical mowing, and aerifying are time consuming, they remain the only effective methods of thatch control. Now, this was in 1976. So that was the only effective method at that time. But he does mention that the Schubert says this is the only thing that will break it down as far as we know. And it wasn't until the 80s and 90s when people started kind of messing around with that. And then really in the last 10 or 15 years, since 2012 or so, have there been 2 or 3 pretty solid papers come out that show there's a pretty good chance that this particular enzyme from a white rot fungi is likely going to help you. It's not going to remove it necessarily. It's not going to do that, but it certainly will have an effect on its rate of production. So let's look at this table before we go. I don't know if I can zoom into this and get it on the page. I can't. Let's look at this paper before we go. So it's the effects of biodethatch and thatch away on thatch measurements of common Bermudagrass teas at 2 locations in Hawaii over a 50-month test period. I thought they said it was over 5 months. Yeah, it's 5 months. That's a typo. Or that's a typo. It says 5 months, but this says 50. I'm pretty sure that's a typo. Anyway, what they did was they measured thickness with the centimeters, and the dates of measurement in 1975. When they started off, the control was 1.4, and all the other products were 1.7, 1.7, 1.6, 1.7, 1.6, all the way down, right? The control of the other golf course was 1.7. So you're looking at about a half an inch, a little more than a half an inch of thatch on this Bermudagrass, on these Bermudagrass golf courses. And you can see the control went from 1.4 to 1.7 to 2 to 1.7. There's a little bit up and down with the control. Nothing's going on in terms of the thatch control, but it kind of 1.7 to 1 to 2, it kind of goes up and down. And all the other ones do the same thing. There's no difference. Biodethatch applied at 1 pound or applied at 4 pounds. Statistically, they're all exactly the same. Okay. There was zero difference. If you go down to biodethatch and thatch away, you'll see that all these, whether it's 1 month down the road or 2 months down the road or 5 months down the road, you won't see any difference from the development of thatch. And what I like about stuff like this is that whenever manufacturers or distributors will see some stuff like this, particularly when it comes into the world of soil testing, they'll say, "Oh, you didn't set the study up right," or "Oh, you didn't run the study for long enough." Or, of course, it's not going to happen there because the CEC is too low there. They always come up with some excuse why it didn't work. Okay, there is always some reason. And sometimes there's a valid reason. Tylenol is not going to cure your headache if you don't start off with a headache. Okay, it's not. You don't need, well, I didn't really notice any difference when I took the Tylenol. Yeah, because there was no headache to begin with. I didn't really notice any application to the turf response to applying foliar iron. Yeah, because your turf is already at a 9 on the color scale. You're not going to see it go to a 10. So there is some value or validity to those arguments. Well, you didn't set it up right. But it's literally every time we see it, literally dozens of times we'll do a study and it's the same result over and over and over. And every time, they didn't do the study right. They didn't run it for long enough. They didn't do it on the right soil, the right turf. There's always some excuse given by manufacturers and distributors to, dismiss results that are not in favor of their product, right? So be mindful of that. These scientists, I'm assuming these scientists, one of them was an assistant professor of horticulture. And, one of them was J.P. Barr. Oh, this is even better. So Murdoch, the author Murdoch was an associate professor in horticulture at the University of Hawaii. And J.P. Barr was a technical sales and product development representative for the company that sold the products. So one of the salesmen was on this article, and the article said it didn't work. That's even better. That just puts a little icing on my cake for Monday morning. So usually it's the opposite. They'll spin the information. But this particular case, the salesman, the product development manager for the company that made the product that's hilarious. For Occidental Chemicals of Hawaii. That's what he was the representative for. And it says the product didn't work. Okay. So it's not entirely healthy to be completely resistant. You don't want to be completely resistant. You want to be healthily skeptical is what you want. And, but not be resistant to change, which is the flaw that I've ran into many times. I find myself sometimes being resistant, and I don't want to do that. You don't want to be resistant to information or to change or information that might change your position. Someone comes in and says, you're doing this and you're doing it wrong. You don't want to be resistant to that because maybe you are doing it wrong. But you want to be healthily skeptical, Think about it skeptically, critically think your way through there and see what evidence they have compared to what evidence you have and kind of weigh it out on both sides. So that's my take for today, guys. The Lawn Sauce says, bugs versus Thatch is one thing. Would be curious about bugs for root uptake promoters. Would be interested in your thoughts on Korean natural farming. Yeah, I don't know about Korean natural farming, the Lawn Sauce. I'm not familiar with that. If it's done by hand or done by more labor or natural products, I'm not sure what you mean by that, Lawn Sauce. But I would say that that's a very good question. Okay, so what am I? I'll be curious about bugs for root uptake promoters. So how? And this is what this channel is about. Okay, I don't know much about bugs for root uptake promoter. Well, I know a little bit, but let's assume I don't know anything about bugs for root uptake promoters. How would I go find that? How I would start is I'd go to turfgrass information file and I'd look at that topic. I would search for root uptake by microorganisms or beneficial fungi for increased nutrient uptake or something along those lines, where there are some organisms that do enhance the uptake of roots by forming a symbiotic relationship with the roots. I would look that up. But you also have to remember that exists. Okay, so let's say the microorganism that increases nutrient uptake by forming an infection into the root, basically, and it helps the plant. Let's say that exists, and let's call it microorganism A. So micro A does this. This product contains micro A. Therefore, this product should do that. That's what I said earlier. A results in B, B results in C, therefore A results in C. You can't do that. You have to have evidence for that product, because I have no idea if what's in that product is actually in that product. And even if it is, I don't know if that specific microorganism that's in that product would result in similar results as that. I know it sounds, like I'm being, too skeptical. But believe me, I've gone down these roads. I've developed products and I've worked with other people in the company that develop products. And I said, how do you know that works? Oh, well, so-and-so published a paper on that active ingredient. I know that. How do you know this product works? Well, this product is supposed to contain the micronutrient. I know that. How do you know this product works? Show me the evidence. And they never did. They released a product, sold hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it did jack squat. And did they come back to me? No, they don't want to come back and have to explain why it didn't work. It didn't work. I don't know why it didn't work, but we had no evidence that it would work. You're trying to connect A to B and B to C, and therefore A is C. It doesn't work that way. Okay, I've gone down those roads. I've seen it many, many, many times where we just assume, manufacturers and distributors will assume that this paper shows this and this product contains it, therefore it should do that. They assume that that's the case, and it doesn't always work that way. Okay. Anyway, so that's how I would start off on the Lawn Sauce. How bugs in a jug and for root uptake, I'd go to TGIF and start searching for it. I'd go to Google Scholar and search for that, find authors that have worked in that area and read their papers and see what they say. But it have to be, I'm very, very likely you have to be specific to a microorganism and hopefully specific to a product. For example, the Raymer papers that we're going to be going over, where he's talking about lacase, and there may be product, and a lacase clearly is showing a beneficial effect on thatch, reduction of thatch growth. There's pretty clear evidence of that at this point. And this product contains lacase, therefore this product should do that. That doesn't necessarily work that way. It needs to be the right enzyme. It needs to be applied at the right rate in the same time frame, hopefully, as they did it with the similar turf grasses. There needs to be some awareness that just because the product contains it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to result in the same results as the paper showed, because they got their lacase from extremely pure source, Sigma Aldrich, which is extremely expensive. Okay, and it works. But that doesn't mean that the product contains it's going to work. It might, but it might not. So we have to be aware of that before you just jump in the pool with both feet and there's no water in the pool. Okay. All right, guys. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Like I said, I'm going to try to get things on the podcast platforms here soon. There's going to be some fun stuff before the end of the year. I hope. I'm working on it. Some people listening are aware what I'm talking about, but we're going to do a couple of interesting, fun things. Maybe not on my channel, but we're going to do some really interesting, fun things. Hopefully before the end of the year. So look forward to that. I'll be announcing it here and somewhere else, I'm sure. But the future looks bright for this channel and for others. So I really appreciate you all watching. I hope you have a great day. I'll be back tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern, and that'll be the last episode before Thanksgiving. Okay, guys? Thanks so much. Appreciate it. Be safe out there. Be kind. See you tomorrow.